She came over unannounced, and everything felt wrong. I wasn't expecting anyone. Not today, not ever, really. My apartment smelled faintly of leftover coffee and old textbooks, the kind of silence that presses against your ears until it feels louder than any noise. I had just slouched onto the couch, feet stretched across the coffee table, when the doorbell rang. Sharp, insistent. I froze, one hand hovering over the couch cushion like it could somehow shield me from whatever interruption was coming. It wasn't my friends. They knew better than to drop by without warning. And then the thought hit me, fast and improbable. Could it be her? Her name had been running through my head all morning, uninvited and insistent, like a song stuck in a minor key. I didn't know why she had come up, why she had to come here now. But as soon as I opened the door, there she was, framed in sunlight like she had stepped out of a photograph, her hair catching the light in a way that made me blink twice. She was beautiful, stunning really, but not the glossy magazine kind. More real, more dangerous in her presence than I thought someone could be. "Hi," she said. Her voice had that softness that could make you lean in, but there was something else hiding behind it. A hesitancy, maybe a question. She wore a blouse that hinted at curves without trying, casual jeans that somehow still made her feel effortless. Mid-40s, maybe, but the kind of woman who had the kind of confidence you couldn't fake, even if you tried. Hey," I stammered. My voice sounded small in my own ears. I cleared my throat, trying to remind myself I had lived in this apartment long enough to not panic at a surprise visit. But there was nothing normal about this. Nothing at all. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, and I felt that pull, that magnetic tug I wasn't ready to analyze. My apartment suddenly felt smaller, cluttered in ways that didn't exist a second ago. The sunlight shifted across the room, touching her shoulders, brushing against her face. I wanted to look away, to act normal, but my eyes kept finding hers. There was a story there, something she wasn't saying, something I wasn't ready to ask. "I hope it's okay," she murmured, glancing at my unwashed dishes, at the stack of unopened mail. I didn't mean to just... Her hand brushed against mine, almost accidental, and I felt a spark, or maybe a warning. Of course, I said too quickly. My heart was doing that dumb, uneven thump that made me wish I could disappear behind the couch cushions. I wanted to ask her why she was here. I wanted to pull her close and keep her away from the world at the same time. I wanted to apologize for everything I'd ever done wrong without even knowing what it was. We sat down, a few feet apart, pretending we were casual, pretending the tension didn't crackle between us. I watched the way her fingers lingered on the edge of her coffee cup, the way her eyes darted around my living room like she was measuring its worth against some invisible standard. I tried to make small talk, whether work, but it all sounded thin. Empty. She didn't fill the room with words, but she filled it with presence. And then, just when I thought I might survive this closeness without melting entirely, her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and her smile faltered for a split second. She didn't answer, just set it down, and the moment stretched, electric and impossible. I leaned forward, drawn in despite, every instinct screaming caution. Before I could even form the question, before I could ask what brought her here unannounced, the doorbell rang again. Not a mistake, not an echo. Sharp, insistent. My stomach dropped. She didn't move. Her eyes met mine, wide, and for a second, just a second, I thought I saw the same mixture of panic and longing mirrored there. And then, the world outside seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what would happen next. The doorbell didn't ring again, and for a long moment, neither of us moved. I could feel my pulse in my throat, like a drumbeat I wasn't allowed to follow. She didn't sit back, didn't excuse herself, just remained there, quiet, poised, almost impossibly still. I remember the first time I met her, months ago, at that tiny coffee shop downtown. She had been laughing at something her friend said, leaning back in her chair in that way that made it look effortless. I noticed the way people instinctively gave her space, or maybe they just didn't want to interrupt her aura. Back then, I didn't know her name, didn't know she'd eventually become this presence in my head I couldn't shake. She shifted slightly, and her eyes met mine again. Something flickered there, hesitation, worry, and maybe the barest trace of curiosity. I knew she had a life I didn't belong in, a career, connections, responsibilities, maybe even someone waiting at home. The thought shouldn't have affected me, but it did. It clawed at my chest with that bitter mix of guilt and thrill, like knowing a fire is dangerous but wanting to touch it anyway. I thought about my own past, messy, awkward, fumbling relationships, the ones that never quite worked, the ones I ran from before they could. Nothing compared to the way my stomach tightened every time she spoke, or the way my hands twitched when she reached for something on the counter. She made me feel unprepared for myself. It didn't have to come. I blurted, finally, though I regretted the words the moment they left my lips. I sounded childish. Weak. I know, she said softly, her voice almost a whisper, like the confession she hadn't allowed herself to say yet. I just want to see you. She didn't explain further, and maybe that was enough. Maybe it was dangerous to say more. The risk was everywhere. Her age, mine, the way society would shake its head if it knew, the way we both knew this shouldn't happen. It didn't matter, though. It didn't matter when her knee brushed mine as she shifted in her chair, sending a jolt straight through me. I caught a glimpse of a photograph on my shelf. Me with my friends, laughing at some pointless moment. A younger version of me, entirely unaware that life would get this complicated. She noticed it too, her eyes softening, and for a second, a memory seemed to float between us. The first time we talked for hours, how she had listened, really listened, to me. How she had made me feel like I was seen, without judgment. I wanted to reach for her hand. I didn't, but our fingers brushed when I picked up a mug she had absent-mindedly placed next to mine. Just a brush, nothing more. But the air shifted. The room grew warmer, smaller, more intimate. The silence between us wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with possibility. She gave me a look then, one I couldn't read, but didn't need to. There was something unspoken, suspended like the moment before a storm breaks, and I realized that despite everything, age, risk, the impossible odds, we had both already crossed some invisible line. And somehow, I knew that neither of us would ever want to go back. The moment lingered longer than it should have. Our fingers had touched, just barely, but it was enough to make the rest of the world shrink to nothing. My brain screamed at me to stop, to pull away, to remember the lines we weren't supposed to cross. And yet, every part of me wanted more, closer, longer, reckless. I cleared my throat, forcing distance, but she didn't move. She just tilted her head, watching me like she could see right through my hesitation. Her presence was a weight, grounding and dangerous at the same time. Maybe I should go, I muttered, my voice low, hoping the words sounded casual. She frowned, almost pained, as if my suggestion hurt her more than it should. Go, now. Her tone wasn't angry, just disappointed, and suddenly I hated myself for even thinking about it. A knock at the door cut through the tension like a knife. My roommate's voice called out, cheerful, oblivious. Hey, you in there? I froze. The apartment felt impossibly small. She hesitated too, and I could see her hand twitch near the counter. I swallowed, trying to steady myself. Yeah, just a minute, I said, my heart hammering. The interruption should have been a relief. It should have allowed me to pull back, to create space, but it didn't. She stayed, leaning slightly toward me, a shadow of movement that suggested she might stay, despite the risk. My pulse raced, a mix of fear and something else I couldn't name. I thought about the rules we hadn't spoken aloud, the age difference, the inevitable judgment, the whispers of people who might notice, the silent alarms in my mind that screamed this is wrong. And yet, here she was, standing in my kitchen, and every rational thought evaporated under the weight of her gaze. She moved closer, pretending to reach for the sugar, but the proximity was deliberate, undeniable. My hand twitched toward hers, then stopped, hovering midair. Our eyes locked, and I caught the smallest inhale. Her lips parted slightly, a fraction too close. I felt my chest tighten. The air felt thick, dangerous. I wanted to pull her into me, wanted to ignore the world and the rules and everything else, but fear and guilt yanked me back. I stepped away, just enough to breathe, just enough to remind myself that some boundaries existed for a reason. "Are you okay?" she asked, voice softer than the tension in the room suggested. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to say anything that could convince both of us we were normal, safe. But I couldn't. I didn't. Instead, I nodded a small, unconvincing motion. She studied me for a heartbeat, and then, just slightly, her lips curled into that hint of a smile that made my stomach twist. Then my roommate barged in, laughing about a TV show or something mundane, shattering the spell. She stepped back immediately, slipping into a kind of careful composure that made my chest ache. I forced a casual smile, but inside, everything was untangled chaos. When the door clicked shut behind my roommate, we both exhaled almost at the same time, like we'd been holding our breath for hours. She didn't say anything, just leaned against the counter, brushing her fingers along the surface, a silent question hanging in the air. I wanted to reach for her again. I wanted to apologize and confess all at once. Instead, I stayed frozen, aware that the moment had passed, but only barely. The storm was coming. I could feel it, quiet and inevitable, and I knew, somehow, that neither of us could resist it forever. It was late. Later than I should have been awake, later than I'd expected her to stay. Yet here she was, leaning against my kitchen counter as if she owned a corner of my world I wasn't ready to give up. The city outside had quieted, street lights casting long, trembling shadows through the blinds. Every sound seemed amplified. The hum of the fridge, the distant siren, the unsteady thrum of my own heartbeat. She laughed softly at something I didn't remember saying. I tried to focus on the words, try to anchor myself in conversation, but all I noticed was her hand brushing against the edge of the countertop again, the slight curve of her neck, the way her eyes lingered just a second too long. I felt both dizzy and awake in the same moment. And then it hit me. Jealousy. Sharp, ugly, sudden. Not toward someone else. Not exactly. But toward the idea of anyone else knowing her, touching her, seeing her the way she was here with me. I hated myself for it. Hated how possessive it made me feel, but I couldn't stop it. I started, voice rough, trying to make it casual. But words didn't come out right. I felt trapped between saying nothing and saying too much, and the silence stretched thickly between us. She tilted her head, searching my face, reading something she didn't need me to say. And that was when the breaking point hit her too. Her fingers trembled slightly as she set down her cup. Her gaze sharpened, and suddenly I wasn't in control of anything. Her presence, her closeness, the way my chest threatened to cave in with longing. "You can't keep pretending," she whispered, voice low, carrying an urgency that made my stomach twist. "I know you feel it too. Don't look away now." I swallowed hard, my hands gripping the edge of the table like it could keep me from moving toward her, or from collapsing entirely. I wanted to tell her everything, but the fear, the impossibility, the sheer magnitude of it all stopped me. Instead, I just stared, caught in the crossfire of desire and guilt, wanting her closer, yet terrified of the consequences. Her eyes softened, then hardened, shifting in a way that made my stomach churn. She stepped a fraction closer, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating off her, close enough to breathe the scent of her hair, to feel the silent pull that had been building since the first time she came over unannounced. My mind scrambled for control, for reason, for some rational explanation I could cling to, but none existed. This wasn't casual, this wasn't fleeting, and it certainly wasn't safe. And yet, in that instant, None of that mattered. She reached out, her fingers brushing the back of my hand. My chest tightened. My brain screamed at me to stop. My body screamed at me to give in. The room was quiet except for our breaths, ragged and uneven, each of us suspended in a tension that had no release. One wrong move, one word, one misstep, and everything would change. I wanted to close the distance. I wanted to lose myself in her. I wanted to stop thinking and start feeling. But I didn't. Not yet. Because right then, the front door clicked. Both of us froze. Her hand lingered near mine, the air thick with what we hadn't said, what we couldn't say, and what we both desperately wanted. And in that suspended moment, I knew everything was about to break. The click of the front door had frozen us, suspended in that fragile, dangerous moment. But what came through the doorway wasn't just the interruption I'd feared. It was something I hadn't even imagined. Her phone buzzed sharply on the counter, and she reached for it with a flicker of hesitation. I could see her jaw tighten, the way her fingers paused mid-grip, as if she were holding herself back from answering. I didn't need to see the screen to know what it said, or at least I thought I did. Then came a voice from the hall, a slow, deliberate knock, followed by the unmistakable laughter of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. "Hey, I thought I'd drop by," said a man's voice. My chest sank. She froze. I could see the tension spike in her shoulders, the subtle shift of her body, as though preparing for confrontation. The kind of confrontation that would expose everything. I peeked around the counter and saw him. Her husband. Or maybe ex. Maybe someone I didn't know. Someone who shouldn't have been here. But the way she looked at him, the subtle curl of recognition in her eyes, told me everything I needed to know. "Mark," she said, voice controlled but brittle. Her composure cracked ever so slightly, a tremor that made my stomach twist. He smiled, not warmly, but like a predator satisfied with his timing. "I didn't expect to catch you here. Thought you might be elsewhere." His gaze flicked to me, sharp and assessing. The room felt suddenly smaller, the air thicker, heavier. I realized how naive I'd been, thinking our stolen moments were private. Everything I had imagined, every chance I had allowed myself to dream, it was now exposed. She stepped toward me instinctively, but he blocked part of the doorway. I felt my own panic flare, anger, fear, and something I wasn't ready to name. Guilt clawed at me, even though I hadn't done anything wrong yet. "We need to talk," she said, calm but firm. Her voice carried a weight that made my chest ache. She turned to me, eyes pleading, warning, apologetic all at once. I wanted to speak, to explain, to make her see that nothing had gone wrong yet, but words caught in my throat. Every instinct screamed at me to protect her, to pull her into my arms, to block the world and everyone in it. But there was Mark, the threshold, the impossible stakes. He laughed again, and it was hollow, mocking. "You've been hiding, haven't you? Thinking you could sneak around." His eyes locked with mine, sharp, accusatory. I realized, painfully, that everything we'd done, the stolen touches, the lingering looks, wasn't just taboo anymore. It was dangerous. Real consequences were here. She exhaled slowly, almost silently, and her hand brushed mine in a fleeting, desperate touch. That one movement said more than words could. "I'm yours if you want me, but the world is against us." And suddenly, every risk, every rule, every careful line we tried not to cross didn't matter anymore. The game had changed, and we were both playing, whether we wanted to or not. I wanted to grab her, to pull her close, but the tension held us apart. I could feel her heartbeat through the brush of her fingers, and in that instant, I realized one thing. No matter what happened next, nothing would ever be the same. The apartment felt smaller than ever, the walls pressing in, but the air between us crackled with something that couldn't be ignored. Mark's laughter had faded down the hall, replaced by silence, the kind of silence that screamed louder than any argument. I glanced at her, and she met my eyes, unflinching, raw, exposed in a way that left me breathless. I can't do this if you're afraid," she said, voice low, trembling ever so slightly. Her hand hovered near mine, and I wanted nothing more than to close the distance, to let her be close enough that the world outside didn't matter. Fear and longing warred inside me. Every instinct told me to step back, to play it safe, to protect myself and whatever scraps of normalcy I had left. But every beat of my heart was louder than reason. Every memory of her, the laughter, the stolen touches, the way she made me feel seen, pulled me forward. "I'm not afraid," I said, though the words wobbled, unsure. I just didn't know if it was right. She tilted her head, that familiar curve of patience and challenge. "Right." Her lips quirked, half smile, half warning. "When has that ever stopped us?" And in that instant, the world outside, the judgment, the risk, the impossible age gap, mattered less than the electricity in the room, the weight of our hands hovering together, the intensity in her gaze that made it impossible to think about anything else. I reached for her hand finally, slowly, deliberately, like testing a fragile glass sculpture. She didn't pull away. Instead, she let her fingers brush against mine, tracing a line, an unspoken promise that she was willing to follow wherever this went. Her voice broke the silence again. "I don't care what happens outside. I just want you to know I'm here. Right now. That's all that matters." The words landed like a spark in my chest. I wanted to answer, to confess everything, to admit that I had thought about her every day, that I had wanted her for longer than I could admit even to myself. But all I managed was a shaky breath, a step closer, a tilt of my head that said the same thing without words. Our fingers intertwined, finally, properly, and the tension between us dissolved just enough to let the truth slip in. Desire, fear, longing, guilt, they all existed, all tangled, but they didn't matter anymore. We were here, together. We didn't kiss, not yet. The room didn't need it to prove anything. The closeness, the shared breaths, the brush of skin and hands, said more than any declaration could. I understood her now in a way that terrified and thrilled me simultaneously. And I think she understood me, too. The world outside waited, impatient and judgmental. But here, in this moment, we had each other. Messy, conflicted, human, vulnerable. And even if tomorrow brought chaos or consequences or heartbreak, I knew we had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Because sometimes understanding is enough, even if the story isn't fully finished. The morning sunlight spilled across the apartment in long, golden streaks, warming the space in a way that made yesterday's tension feel like a distant shadow. I woke to the faint scent of coffee and her perfume lingering in the air. She was already there, leaning against the counter, casually elegant in a way that made my chest tighten despite the calm of the morning. She looked up, caught my eyes, and smiled, the kind of smile that had power to undo all my defenses. No words were needed. The air between us carried everything we had felt, all the stolen moments, the fear, the longing, the risk. "I stayed," she said simply, tilting her head. Her voice carried a quiet strength that left no room for doubt. I wasn't leaving. I swallowed, heart hammering, and let myself close the distance this time really close. Her hand met mine, fingers interlocking naturally, like we'd been made to fit this way. Every hesitation, every stolen glance, every brush of skin from the past weeks seemed to condense into that moment. Messy, imperfect, undeniable. "Then neither am I," I whispered, and for the first time, the words felt true in every sense. I didn't have to pretend, didn't have to reason it out, didn't have to worry about right or wrong. It was just us, here now, human and raw. We moved around each other in quiet familiarity, laughter spilling out in little bursts, gentle teasing, shared looks that said more than language ever could. The apartment, once filled with tension and impossibility, felt alive again. Alive with something real, something we could claim without explanation. I realized then that it didn't matter what the world thought. The age, the judgment, the risks, they were real, yes, but they didn't define us. What mattered was the trust, the vulnerability, the willingness to meet each other halfway, over and over again. We didn't rush. We didn't need to. The small moments, hand brushing hand over the coffee mug, leaning into each other on the couch, quiet laughter echoing against the walls, were enough. They were everything. At one point, she paused, resting her forehead against mine, eyes closed. "We'll figure it out," she murmured, as if promising herself as much as me. I nodded, heart full. There were still uncertainties ahead, but the truth was simple. We wanted each other. That was our choice. That was our decision. That was our story, messy and beautiful, unfolding in its own time. And as the sunlight shifted across the room, casting long shadows and illuminating her face, I asked myself quietly, could love really be this effortless and terrifying at once? Could someone feel like home and fire at the same time? And I looked at her again, fingers still intertwined, and thought, maybe the only risk worth taking is the one that feels inevitable. Could we really have it all? Or would the world always try to pull us apart? Was this just a fleeting moment, or the beginning of something lasting? And most importantly, could we trust ourselves enough to never let go?